I've delivered bad news, but a nervous tick of mine is that I smile when I get nervous. So I'm delivering this like really negative message to someone who reports to me or like constructive criticism of something. And I'm like smiling as I'm telling them this.
Oh.
Yeah.
January marks the season of company kickoff meetings. It's the time of year when CXOs energize their teams with insights into the company's roadmap for the next 12 months and share updates on products, sales, and marketing strategies. But will 2023 be different? Some companies are seeing downturns in renewals and new sales. In this podcast with Andres Peters, Chief Learning Officer at Maestro, a sales training company, we'll go into what CEOs and other executives need to do for their 2023 kickoffs. How will the current economic climate change your messaging? How should you prepare to make sure everyone is aligned? And how do you convey difficult news while keeping your teams motivated? We'll answer these questions and more. Hi, welcome to the morebusiness.com podcast. My name is Raj Khera. I'm your host, and I'm joined today by Andres Peters. Andres is the Chief Learning Officer at Maestro Group, which creates lots of sales material. And we have a really interesting topic because what we want to talk about is sales meetings, and that's coming up for the beginning of the year, right around January, where a lot of companies will have their sales kickoffs. Welcome, Andres. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Raj. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited because Andres and I have worked a little bit together in the past when he was creating training material for Maestro Group. They have a lot of online material where people can just self-paced classes. They actually have a lot of stuff available for free, which is very nice. Give back to the community. And so Andres, sales kickoff meetings, that's a big topic. It's not just like sales kickoffs, it's company-wide kickoffs. And a lot of times companies that put these together have an agenda that they want to go forward with for the CEO to talk about, for other team leaders to talk about. So let's get into some of that. Just a real quick background on your history, just so our audience knows why we picked you to talk about this topic.
So, my background is prior to working with Maestro Group, I actually spent 14 years working at Deloitte, where I had various roles from advising clients to also with internally in learning development, where I was supporting a practice of 20,000 professionals. And really at the end of the day, regardless of what the role was, whether it was internal client facing, at the end of the day, what I always say that my own personal mission is to help people do their jobs better and to do it more artisan-like. And so I do that via coaching, via training, and also advising leaders and, how you can get the best out of your team and how you can make sure that the messages that you deliver are consistent with your company's mission, vision, and values. I do that also by leveraging a lot in the latest from industrial organizational psychology as well as organizational behavior overall. In fact, that kind of led me to my current passion. I don't know if it's a project or current passionate journey in getting my master's in industrial and organizational psychology.
And you're getting that from Harvard, not a small school to get it from. So pretty good. Yeah. Andres knows what he's talking about. He's been doing this for a long time. Andres, as we look at sales kickoff meetings, heading into 2023, there's like talks that we're in a recession, that we're going to be in a recession. Other companies are saying, no, everything's fine. We're just tearing it up. How is the current economic climate changing the message that CEOs need to convey in their sales kickoff meetings this year?
Yeah. So I think that was when I started thinking about this question in particular, what I was trying to figure out is like, what is a soundbite that a CEO can take away from this conversation when it comes to their just kickoff meeting in general? And really, for me, it's really balancing perception with reality and transparency, right? The idea that we are going into a recession or that we're going towards an economic downturn, many different places or many different sources of information are saying very different things. Some are saying yes, some are saying no, some are saying we're in one now. So understanding what your workers are seeing and hearing from the marketplace, from the industry that they're in, it's important to acknowledge that perception, but really balance it with both the reality of your business and the transparency that you're going to allow people to ask questions, to understand more, because you may know something that they don't know, whether it's good or bad. And until they're able to find the information that they need, there's always going to be the thought in the back of their head saying, my job's at risk, or I'm at risk, or should I start looking? The other thing too, that I've also started to hear a lot of messages kind of coming from CEOs or leaders is this idea of we need to start asking people to do more with less, right? Like we need to have people either we're not going to hire that role that gets, vacated, or if we have to let people go, we're not going to backfill them. And coming out of the pandemic, or just even through the pandemic, people are more overworked than ever. And so now you're telling them a message that they've got to figure out ways to continue to meet goals or to extend goals using less resources, right? So now you're just adding more stress upon stress to people. So really being transparent in how you're conveying what the goals are and how you're reprioritizing at the top, your strategy, because some goals are obviously going to be more important than others. And then also thinking creatively in how you can source and deploy resources, whether that is, if you're not going to hire someone, do you have enough, funds on hand to be able to hire someone for like a gig? Right? Contingent workforce, and being able to expand and contract based on the needs at that particular point of time. So I think those two kind of key messages, or those two types of thoughts, need to really go into CEOs' minds or leaders' minds as they start thinking about what their message is going to be for 2023.
One of the things that I know people are concerned about is even though their company's doing well, they might be worried about their job because, is it really going as well as we think it is? That like they don't know. So that transparency component is, I think, really key in leaders just sharing that, look, there's other people out there that may be struggling. We're actually in a better spot than they are. We're doing well. Now, on the flip side of it, there's going to be companies who have reps who are struggling to close deals right now. They're struggling to get renewals. I've seen that a lot on LinkedIn. And so how would a leader who is facing a flat line or maybe even a decline, send a clear message for their sales kickoff that, hey, things are actually going to be fine in 2023. Here's what we're doing. What do you think someone should say?
Yeah. And I think that's really, again, going back to like what that message for 2023 is going to be, right? If you're struggling in renewals, if you're struggling in, expansion, then how are you investing your resources in helping kind of bring in those new logos, right? Or improve, your inbound, avenues, right? For folks, improve some of your marketing efforts so that you can get more inbound. Or even, taking a look at the data that your CRM is providing and seeing like where are the friction points in either our current customers to get them to renew, or in how our sales reps are speaking with customers to even get the deal in the first place, right? Like, is the tactic to, just win the logo, or is the tactic to create a long-term relationship, right? Is that the strategy? So I think, even depending on what the strategy is for 2023 and what you want to focus on, is making sure that your data is supporting, the ability for your team to actually execute against that strategy as well. And, not just thinking just because this is what the industry is doing or what's happening in the industry or what's happening in the market doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to be a trend that impacts your organization. If you're able to look at the data and the data doesn't support that, right? Like, do you have to pivot is the question.
Yeah. One of the things I think it's really important to share inside some of these meetings is what's happening with our product. Where's it going? What's the roadmap looking like? And sometimes a hesitancy, I think, amongst the product teams, to share too much about the product roadmap with the sales team because they know that things can change. And oftentimes when people get excited about the feature that they've been requesting for the last 6 months, now it's finally on the radar, they're ready to start talking about it to the customers because, they're like, oh, I know people are ready to buy that. When's it going to be ready? And I've seen, unfortunately, too many situations where a product manager feels pressed to give a timeline. And they say, okay, I think it'll be ready by the next quarter. That's the message that starts somehow getting communicated to every customer. They miss the deadline. Customers are, hey, you said it was going to be this quarter. What happened? And so that's another thing that they really need to tune into. What are some of the other things that teams need to just make sure they manage in terms of messaging during that sales kickoff?
Yeah, I think what the biggest thing is really understanding, what is going to be the after effect of that SKO or that kickoff? Really, like, what is it that you want people to either say, do, or feel after they walk away from that room, after they walk away from that meeting? Because if you don't understand kind of what the next steps are in terms of getting people, not only getting people aligned, but then getting them to actually start executing, then that SKO really isn't going to provide you the ROI that you think it's going to be. It's just like another webinar or another just, in-person meeting. So if you are looking at, changing your strategy, it's okay, well, what is the message that's going to be sent right after the SKO? What are the commitments that you're going to need the team to make, immediately afterwards or during the session? And how do you get them to actually commit to that? How are you going to monitor that strategy throughout the year? I think, it's one of those things where it's like, if you will it, it'll happen, like it'll manifest itself. But really it's, the idea is you want to make sure that you understand what are those indicators of success for yourself, and that gets communicated to those folks, and that those expectations get communicated out to your reps. And that goes with any part of the organization, whether it is, product, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's HR, right? Like if your company's doing well and you really want to hire a lot of folks, like, are you even capable of managing additional people coming in? Is your onboarding process ready for that? Do you have the right leadership structure in place? So I think there's important considerations about what happens immediately after that SKO or that kickoff that leaders really need to sit down and think about, and who's going to be ultimately responsible for executing, against those strategies.
So really the kickoff, and I've seen situations where leaders are all ready to have been part of these, like ready to do the kickoff, and everybody is just lock focused. Marketing is getting the slide decks ready. The sales team is getting ready for their presentations. Product team's ready to show some demos. So everybody's getting everything ready beforehand. But I like what you're saying is it's not just the beforehand, getting all your ducks in a row. It's also, what are you going to do right afterwards? Like, what are the action plan items? And that's something that probably should be discussed at the SKO itself, right? It's like, hey, this is what we've gotten. Here's what we've presented. Here are the next steps. And so having that clear.
One of the recommendations that I have for leaders is like a lot of this information is going to be new for those individual contributors on those teams, right, that are attending these meetings, giving them time to be able to like reflect and see how what they've just heard impacts the job that they're doing or impacts what they're going to be focused on, and how they can add that to their own goals is another way to, one, not only get commitment, but also motivate people towards something. Because they're going to be hearing a lot of information, and unless that reflection and that actual being able to create those neural connections between what you just heard and what that means for you as an individual, it's not going to create any sort of internal motivation for that individual to want to reach those goals, because they haven't prioritized that against what they've been told to do the previous year, right? Or what's priority to them this year that they haven't heard yet, right? Like, so I think it's really important to provide that time for that reflection, and also that commitment writing or the commitments to, their leaders and their own teams to help co-create that as well.
One of the challenges I've seen small companies encounter is that the only person, or maybe two people, that know all of the presentations is the CEO, maybe the COO, because a lot of people operate in silos, and marketing's got their presentation ready, sales got theirs, products got theirs, and so on. The CEO knows exactly what's going to go on, but it's oftentimes the first time many other groups, including executive leadership, hears their peers talking about stuff. And so sometimes that can create, it's a missed opportunity for being able to align everything, right? If I'm in marketing, I know what products can be talking about. I can actually prepare follow-up things for discussions that my marketing team would have internally, which could foster what you just talked about. What did you hear, right? After the presentation, what did you hear, so that you get clarity on the questions that are popping around in their head, yet they just weren't sure how to articulate or ask. So getting those ducks in a row, I think, are pretty good too, right? So maybe you could you chat about that in a bit? Like, what are the kind of preparation techniques or things that people should do to make sure that everyone is aligned going into the kickoff?
Yeah, I think, Raj, you hit the nail on the head first, is like, how is your leadership team, or how's the group that's both organizing this? If you're a small company, you may give it to someone to just help kind of create the agenda, but like, who's going to own what the story is at the end of the day after this SKO? Like, what is the narrative the beginning, middle, and end, what story is that telling to the individual? Because if it's just an agenda of like very disparate conversations that are happening, then no one's going to be able to actually put all those puzzle pieces together and really see the forest through the trees when it comes to what the vision is for the organization for the year. The other thing that I would say too is depending on the messaging that you're conveying, whether if it's a great message, then this is not as important. Well, it really depends, right? Because it could be great for you, but for the people, if they're already stressed out and they're like, overproducing and like, are ready to go, like it may not resonate with them. But really understanding who in your organization has both formal and informal influence and power across your teams. So for example, product, right? Like you may have an engineer who is, or a developer that has a lot of deep technical expertise and can do anything that you ask them to do. But like anytime you ask them to do it, right, like they like to push back, right? And now you're asking them to add in to create this new vision with new features and all of that. Well, how could they impact your organization if they don't agree with what you are, what your strategy says? Or how could they impact others on your team and take this really great message of growth and now turn it into this message of, well, now I'm going to be overworked even more, or like, I don't agree with this approach because the way I've done it before, it's much better we do it a different way. So really understanding who has influence, across your teams and who has that power, get them aligned before delivering that message broadly. Right. Understand what could cause them some concern and see if you can manage that so that, once that message is delivered, when they pick up that conversation, you still have some control in how that conversation looks like, right? After they've left the room. Because nothing's worse. Most folks, especially if you're on a leadership level, and depending on the size of your company or how flat your organization is, people won't tend to hear from the C-suite very often, except in these town halls or in these SKOs. They mainly work with their middle managers, like either their direct managers or directors or VPs, depending on the size of the organization. And so they trust them more. So depending on what is the message that they're providing, they're going to put more credence to that versus the CEO who's saying, we're great and I'm just a cog in a machine. But, Raj, you and I have worked together for 3+ years. We meet weekly. I trust your opinion on what the CEO says. And if you're saying, he's painting a much rosary picture than I'm seeing here, then I'm going to believe you over the CEO.
And that's actually a really important point, because sometimes we go to these things, top leadership does the rah-rah, everybody's excited, they're off, meeting with their colleagues, having beers, it's a great feel-good fest, but then all the back channel stuff happens afterwards. And you may have some of these leaders saying, I don't know why they said that at sales kickoff. That's not really the way things are. And suddenly, all this work that you spent time and money and effort trying to get everybody aligned, out the window. Out the window. So it's really important to make sure that you've got those ducks in a row, that you've got everybody along the same lines on that same team, rowing in the same direction, I think is really key. What are some of the signs that you've seen in companies that you've worked with that things aren't aligned? What are the things that an executive leader can look for? Do you have examples of ways they can spot this? Because I've been a CEO. I tell you, sometimes you're the last one to hear things. So
So I think one way that I would recommend like leadership or CEOs kind of thinking about is trying to see what is the level of trust that your leadership team has with you, and then seeing what level of trust their teams have with them. Because if there's a level of trust, it's going to be easier to spot any sort of back channel conversation, any sort of like negative responses to what you've said or disbelief from what you've said. If you don't have that level of trust, then you're not going to be able to spot it, right? Like the only way that you'd be able to spot it is if you start seeing a large number of people leaving the organization, if you start seeing numbers really dip without any sort of, real reasons why they're dipping, like the data isn't telling the story that your leaders are telling you is happening. That would be the only way that you would be able to really spot it, which would be after the fact. But the only way in which you can be proactive to understanding whether or not there is some concerns within the organization would be to first assess what that level of trust is within your leadership team and within their team. So I would first kind of ask them to, keep a lookout for one, if how much time people are spending doing, doing work kind of outside of their core work, meaning are they, if they are supposed to be on the phones, are they on the phones, or are they, just randomly online, but not really producing any work? Are they working on other projects that aren't core to their work that you've asked them to work on, and they're spending more time doing that? Because that could show a sign that they're not engaged with what their core day-to-day is. And then lastly, in their one-on-one, and this actually is probably the best piece of advice, in their one-on-ones, how are their one-on-ones structured with their individual teams? If it's just talking about the metrics in the day-to-day, then that is a sign that you're not creating an engaged organization. You're just creating a very process and numbers-driven organization, and kind of removing the human element from it.
Yeah. I mean, there's merit to having process for sure.
Yeah.
But without having a human element, it's hard to retain people, hard to acquire people for your roles that you have unfilled. It makes it just growing a company a lot harder. Hey, there are going to be some CEOs out here listening that have to convey bad news, that the market's tough, we're not growing as fast. How do you convey that bad news without suddenly creating this ripple effect where people are like, oh, see ya, I'm out of here? That makes a spiral happen. What kind of things can people say? How do you convey hard news?
Yeah. So one is understanding the severity of that hard news, right? And making sure that the way in which you deliver it is commensurate with that level. If it's a slight dip in revenue, but it may not have impact on the actual headcount, then that's a very different one than, we are kind of running towards the end of our runway in terms of our cash flow, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions. So really understanding, what is the actual message that you need to convey, and also really understanding, what level of preparation you have to do personally to deliver that. I've worked with leaders before where, right before they're about to kind of speak to the entire organization, they have, meetings directly before and a meeting directly afterwards. And so the only time that they're actually able to talk about and deliver this bad news is in that block of time. Well, I've supported leaders who were planning to deliver an update on financials and they weren't great. And they were running behind because the other meeting was running over, and that ended up causing issues with the agenda. So then people dropped because they were waiting, and they were like, okay, well, this isn't that important. The message was delivered in a very rushed manner, and then questions couldn't be answered. And so then that's where a lot of that back channel can happen, because now you're hearing it secondhand from someone else. The other thing too is CEOs are human, right? If you're stressed out about it, what are some ways that you can de-stress yourself before having to deliver this message, so that you're not delivering a stressed message from a posture of being stressed, right? Because when you're delivering a difficult message, you still want to convey confidence that you believe in the business and you believe that this is just going to be a temporary moment in time and not necessarily the ongoing future for the organization. And if you don't mentally and emotionally prepare yourself to deliver that message, it can fall completely flat. And people may think that, you may convey a different message through your body language, or just even through your tone, if you're not able to display, that confident leader, right? In that message. Also making sure you practice the message verbally, right? Like you actually articulate it. Because that can also demonstrate a lot in terms of whether you were even confident to say those words, or even if the words come out the way that you intended them to.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't tell you how many times I've sat in front of the mirror trying to look at this presentation. Because now we got webcams, obviously, so I use that to see, how do I sound, how do I come across? That's actually something that a lot of executives don't do. You really should just record yourself, look at the video camera, and just make that presentation, and then just go through the pain of listening to yourself, because sometimes it is painful. I look back at some of my recordings and, oh my gosh, my very early ones, oh, I can't even watch without like turning it off and having to go. They're hard to watch. I'm not saying I'm great at these now, but boy, I tell you, some of the earlier ones are tough.
And it's great. It'll also show you like what your nervous tics can be, right? Like when you're delivering a message that you're uncomfortable with sharing. Me personally, like I've delivered bad news, but a nervous tick of mine is that I smile when I get nervous. So I'm delivering this like really negative message to someone who reports to me or like constructive criticism of something. And I'm like smiling as I'm telling them this.
Oh.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't know this and if you didn't watch yourself on video actually and know to adjust your facial
exactly.
expression, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really important. What are some of the other struggles or mistakes that you see leaders make when it comes to the kickoffs?
I think sometimes not connecting the dots between, and we talked a little bit about this, not connecting the dots between the different parts of the organization. As you mentioned, especially in smaller organizations, people will tend to silo. So how are you bringing together that leadership team or those where there are adjacencies across the organization, like for example, product with sales or sales with marketing, to provide updates on those strategic goals that have been set across the organization, not revisiting the conversation enough, right? They've spent all of this time and energy creating this agenda that talks about our vision for the year. And how are we keeping individuals up to date on it in a way that helps them see what the story is at a particular point in the year? Just to give an update on financials or a Gantt chart is not going to tell that story. So how are you conveying that? And how are those middle managers or those middle tier leaders conveying, where their teams are? And then the last thing, go ahead.
Why don't you wrap up the last thing?
Yeah. The last thing too is not allowing enough time for people to ask questions, right? Especially if you're going to be delivering difficult news, giving people the time to internalize what's just been told to them and then be able to ask the questions that they have, or giving them different methods of asking questions. Because some people may be too afraid to verbalize the question, giving them either a way to do it anonymously or giving them, ability to send it through email, but just different ways for people to ask those questions and get their, concerns acknowledged and addressed and be seen.
I think one of the goals that every CEO wants to have at the end of their kickoff meetings for the company is that, one, everybody's aligned, but then two, everybody's pumped. They're motivated. What are some techniques that you recommend to create that motivation? What to say, how to say it? What are some ways that leaders I guess part of it's the personality too, right? If they're really energetic, and most CEOs I know, not everyone, but most of them have a lot of energy. Tell me what you've seen.
Yeah, I think what I've seen done, especially in smaller organizations where monetary compensation may not be feasible for folks, and I guess inside, actually, one thing that you can do, especially in your kickoff, or what are some of the good things that happened the previous year and celebrating those achievements. But I also think having each leader have their teams kind of identify an individual contributor or manager on that team who kind of went above and beyond to live your company's mission, to live your company's values, and celebrating that individual, right? And recognizing that individual. Because that's just one way, again, to not only recognize top performers, but also people who really are, living true to your company's, why your company exists, the purpose of your organization.
Mm-hmm. You're recognizing them, yeah.
Yeah. And then outside of that SKO or that kickoff, sending individual shout outs either in Slack, sending them personal messages, sending them personal emails, thanking them for their commitment, and then thinking about any sort of other recognition tactics that you could use to help recognize people that are doing great work and that you want them to continue to do great work. Could you give them a half day off, right, on a Friday if it's in the summer, and just say, like, take the rest of the day off, you've done a great job. Giving them If you're in person or a hybrid organization, can you give them more remote days, right? Like where they can actually work from home and have that be a way to recognize folks and keep them motivated as well. Highlighting any sort of messages that, people outside their team sends them. One of the things that I like to do as just a manager is anytime anyone has great feedback to send for the people that support me, is I actually forward it on to my leader, CC the person who got the great feedback, and show, hey, this person did this. This is what the result of it. I just wanted to take the time so that you could be aware that this person did this great work. And that's just another way that not the CEO, but at least the leaders can show, like, giving that person visibility to their leaders as well.
Yeah. Andres, what inspires you?
So it's interesting. What inspires me is, I think, what's also causing a lot of concern in the, I don't know, so in the business world today. But I think what inspires me is that really, like, specifically with all of the advantages or advancements in AI, I still feel like being a human is a strategic advantage for organizations. And so what's really inspiring to me is, like, how to leverage AI as a force multiplier, not as a replacement for, the work that I do, the sticky questions that I'm considering, the next level of what the workforce looks like, right? So that's what really inspires me.
Okay. It's interesting with this whole chat GPT making all the news everywhere, people testing it out. And then there's other people saying, hey, Google can recognize AI related content. I find that the people who just depend completely on this, there's a lot of tools out there that use that same algorithm. There's Jasper, right? Sonic, Scale, not. There's so many of them. And I find that if you're looking for an AI assisted tool to do all the work for you, you got to stop being lazy. You got to put in the time. You got to do the homework. You got to make some updates. Maybe you can use it to help come up with an outline and maybe a couple of sentences here and there, but you really got to apply your own mind and critical thinking to update content, because otherwise it's just generating fluff for you and fluff for someone else, and you're not going to get any kind of like mileage out of it. So
Yeah.
So you got to be really careful. And to your point, adding the human touch, it's not going to be able to add human stories into this, right? Into the output that's anything recent anyway, because the algorithm is based on data from like a couple of years ago. So interesting for that. Yeah. Hey, so what do you read? Like, what books are you reading now, or book are you reading now? What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, so some of my favorite books are actually, I think, really, if from what inspires me, I think these books would make sense to you, right? Like, based on what inspires me. So, three of my favorite books that I always recommend anyone to read are, the first is To Sell Is Human by Dan Pink.
Yes. Very good book. Very good book. Yeah, yeah.
Give and Take by Adam Grant is another book that I like to read, or that I always recommend. And then the last one is really, I think, an interesting book, because it's about productivity, but I think it's true for anyone who's really looking to be much more artisan-like, or much more a deeper functional expert in the space that they're in. But it's called Deep Work, and it's by Cal Newport. And it's in that book, I would recommend for any professional at any level, because it helps you reprioritize what's important to you and really focus on what is important, for your own personal or professional development goals.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Andres, what are some of the courses that Maestro Group has available for sales teams, sales leaders? And I know there's several pieces of material that's available for free, like worksheets and even courses. What are some of those, and how can people get them?
Yeah, so we have courses on our own proprietary sales process. It's really just sales professionalism, called the Phoenix Sales Method, and the Science of Sales. We also have courses on information gathering, so how you can ask better questions or get more information to help you de-risk deals. We also have a great course on how to attend conferences and how to maximize the ROI in those conferences. So not just attend, but almost like this SKO, or like what's happening before, what's happening during, what's happening afterwards, to make sure that you can really capitalize on the networking that you're getting out of out of the conference and make sure that you're connecting with the right people. And then we also have a course that's on effective emails. One of my favorite anecdotes to say is that the average knowledge worker gets 120 emails a day. So, if you're in sales, right, and you only send one email and think they didn't respond, well, most likely it's not that it's not that they didn't want to connect. It's just that it probably fell in their email somewhere in that email inbox. So we have a course on how to break through the noise. And then people can find it either they can email me directly at andres@maestrogroup.co, where I can provide them a link to it. Or if they go to courses.maestrogroup.co, they can request a coupon code if they'd like to try one of our courses for free.
Very good. Andres, thank you. Very informative conversation on how to structure your sales kickoff meetings. It's a big topic for a lot of companies as we head into 2023 and try to make this be a banner year. Thank you again for joining us today.
I really appreciate it, Raj. You have a great one.